Chairing the debate will be Jim Naughtie, and he's joined by Stephen Gethins, Katie Grant, Michael Moore MP, and Michael Fry.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It's lovely to be here. Stephen is a former advisor to Alex Salmond. Katie, as you will know, is a well-known writer and commentator. Michael Moore, MP, is former Secretary of State for Scotland. And Michael Fry is here as a jack-of-all-trades historian who can give us his own distinctive perspective. And Michael and I have known each other long enough for me to be able to shut him up at an appropriate moment. Let me just open with one brief observation which struck me forcibly the other night. The vote is 3 weeks on Thursday. We've been at this a long time. But if you look at tomorrow and the great debate which will occur on the BBC at 8:30 between Alex Salmond and Alistair Darling, the second debate, which is going to be shown across the UK, incidentally, the extraordinary fact is this, that from tomorrow until polling day, we have a length of time which is almost exactly the length of time in which a normal general election campaign takes place. So we've done all this, we've got here, we've been through it all, we've got the leaflets, we've got our polling cards, and yet what remains is still the length of a normal general election campaign. I find that well, slightly scary, but also an interesting observation. I want to ask Michael and Stephen, who are strong proponents of the two sides of this debate, to just tell us where we are and where they think it will go in the next 3 weeks. Katie, who I think describes herself as a mild no voter, is that still the case from last week?
Yes.
We did this about a week ago. And Michael, although he's here in a historical role, is a Conservative who votes yes, which is fair enough, isn't it?
Up to a point.
Oh. I might have expected that, but I want Michael and Stephen to start us off with views. Michael, let me just ask you, first of all, it is said by all the pollsters that the no side is in the lead. Where do you think we are in this debate, and how do you see the next 3 weeks?
It's an amazing moment. As you set the scene there, Jim, it's 3 and a bit years since Alex Salmond won his majority in the Scottish Parliament that secured the mandate, which has created this amazing referendum process. It is the most exciting political moment in Scotland's recent past. I'm always wary with historians to be too hyperbolic about my claims, and whatever view we take of it, I hope Scotland emerges with great credit thus far in the way that we have conducted the debate, which is not to say that it's been anything less than full-on and very robust, but I think that the maturity of the way in which it's been carried out, the essentially democratic way in which it is undertaken, that has all been very good for us. But no time for complacency, no time for getting self-absorbed. There's a rather important question at stake, and every politician, every side of this debate will style this as the most important political decision people in Scotland have ever been asked to take, and I do think that can be said without fear of contradiction. If we choose one particular path, it is irreversible, and that's actually the most important distinction between this decision and the general election analogy which you've just used, Jim. My judgment, as somebody who's very much in favour of Scotland staying in the United Kingdom, but a reformed United Kingdom, and no doubt we'll come back to that later on, my judgment is that we are on course to remain part of the United Kingdom. However, I take none of it for granted, and certainly I see friends in the audience here today from both sides of the debate who have been out pounding the streets already and will do for the next 3.5 weeks. Every vote counts, that great other political cliche to add to the many I've already used. The only poll that matters is the one on the 18th of September. When we get there, I hope that the judgment I make that Scotland enjoys the best possible arrangements, the best of both worlds, if you may, strong Scottish Parliament, a strong voice in the United Kingdom, great opportunities and great resilience, both economically and in terms of our place in the world, as well as enjoying a really important part of the United Kingdom. Our identity is multi-layered. We know that particularly here in the borders. All these things, I think, are driving people, perhaps not as enthusiastically sometimes as others, but certainly moving people towards staying part of the United Kingdom. But one thing that, whatever our perspective is, I hope we'll all agree on, is that Scotland is changing. I do not believe for a minute that the status quo, although that's technically what people argue against, I don't think that will hold. I think the new Scotland that emerges from this is one that has examined its inner core in terms of its values, in terms of identity, in terms of its political structures, and one which has got a real appetite, if we're staying part of the United Kingdom, to do more ourselves here in Scotland. And no doubt we will debate that a little bit this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Stephen.
It might be the first and only time I say this afternoon, but actually I agree with a great deal of what Michael has just said, which is, first of all, this is a massive moment for the country. I think it's possibly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Now, obviously, I sit on the other side of the fence, so for me, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Scotland to get a government it votes for Scotland to take full responsibility for its own affairs. Before we get into the political debate and nitty-gritty, but I'd like to reflect just a little bit on where we are and where I think is a great credit to the country, is that I know that a lot of people who attend this kind of festival will speak to people from around the world. And one thing that's just been fantastic for me is the way that we've had a robust debate about the future of the country, in which the overwhelming majority of those who are campaigning for a yes vote or a no vote have got engaged, have conducted themselves well. We're looking at a turnout that could possibly beat any general election in recent times. Hundreds of people are turning up turned up in winter evenings to go and talk about the debate and make their views heard. The turnout today is reflective of the view across the country, and I think this has been a positive thing for the country. What I'd like to see would be on the 18th of September is for Scotland to seize the opportunity of a lifetime. I mean, I respect my colleagues in the No campaign, and they've got their point of view. But I'd love it if the country seized its opportunity and to make Edinburgh a proper international capital again. That's why I'm in it, and that's what I'd like to say. But for the next 3.5 weeks, it's not that long, folks. It really isn't. It will step up a gear, but I also think there are a lot of undecided out there, and I think a lot of people will be taking the time to really weigh things up.
Katie, I saw a sign in Edinburgh Poster on a window yesterday which said, "Are you yes yet?" Struck me as a very clever poster. And it suggested that what the yes side is banking on, at least what it's saying to people, is, look, there is an inexorable tide that is pulling those who haven't made up their mind towards the kind of decision that Stephen thinks they should take. What do you think's happening to the undecided?
Well, I think that many of the undecideds are still undecided. Indeed, Sergio Caschi, the screenwriter, thinks that I'm still going to swither on the day and vote yes. So I do think that there are still a lot of switherers. But actually, I become less of a switherer as the vote approaches, because I do believe that we are a beacon for something in the United Kingdom, and that's something that I want to see preserved. I don't think that stable, progressive, liberal unions, there are not very many of us on the ground, particularly ones that didn't start well, which this one certainly didn't, but the union has started and gone on and prospered. So my reason, really, I think, for wanting to preserve the UK is that for all our divergences of opinion about many, many things, the union between England and Scotland is in fact a beacon of hope. I think in this strange, funny old UK, we have managed to do something which is almost unique. We've got one country and 4 very distinct nations. Everybody knows what a Scot is, everybody knows what a Welshman is, everybody knows what an Englishman is, and somebody from Northern Ireland. So we have differences, but although I do think that some of the scale of the differences have been possibly exaggerated, but even if we take it as gospel truth, that one of the differences between Scotland and England is that we are more egalitarian and we have a greater social conscience and all that kind of thing. That seems to me, increasingly, that it's more of a reason to stay together than it is to move apart. I like living in the part of the UK which is, as you might say, the UK's social conscience, and I want to see the whole of the UK prosper and progress in that way. So I see a really sort of positive vision of the union as we move into a fractured 21st century. I think that we in the UK can show what unions can do and how unions can actually work. So to me, Scotland's already a nation, we have our own identity. In the United Kingdom, we present a beacon of quite extraordinary hope to other fractured parts of the world, how things can actually work and move forward.
Thanks very much, Katie. Michael, I just want to ask you a question in which, you can reflect because you've written about it and thought about it. What do you think of contemporary Scots' view of the Union?
What do I think of
of what contemporary Scots think of the Union?
Well, I would say, in answer to your question, and also partly in answer to Katie's, that of course the Union has had 300 years, and in that time it built up bonds which were strong, but there seems to be little doubt that in the last 50 years the Union has been weakening. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt of that whatever. If you take the famous general election of 1955, which was the last time the Conservatives won a majority in Scotland, at that time, the political systems of England and Scotland were practically identical. You had two big parties, and then at that time just one tiny wee third party. At the moment, the political systems of Scotland and England are entirely different. They're ruled by different parties. In each of those countries, the governing party the Scottish National Party obviously doesn't exist in England. The Conservative Party scarcely exists in Scotland. So you have, and that's an expression, it seems to me, of all kinds of deeper things that are going on in society. So if you take as the basic function of any political system in any country, the function of any political system is to express in public life the values of the people who compose it. Now, if we stay in the United Kingdom, we have a political system which does not express our values, very obviously. And therefore it seems to be on purely pragmatic grounds, simply without going into the emotion of the whole thing. On a level of pure political analysis, it would be altogether better, healthier, more efficient, more rational for Scotland to have a state which corresponds to its political system.
Michael.
You see, that great political philosopher, Billy Connolly, observed that he felt he had more in common with the Dockers of Liverpool than he did, with due respect to Catherine and others, with the Lairds of Scotland. Because he felt that people around England, Wales, parts of Northern Ireland, had more in common with his social values, his economic outlook from his background in Glasgow than did the Great Landed Estates or anywhere in between, as you might put on the spectrum. And I think it's essentially a defeatist argument if we say that, and I do appreciate this, we don't like the particular government we have at the present time in the United Kingdom, and we will now draw a political boundary between ourselves and the rest of the United Kingdom to isolate ourselves from that and make sure that never happens again, or it can't possibly happen here. I dispute the very notion that our values are radically different. I think within this room we would get a whole range of values. Within this country we get a whole tapestry of values. And there's this almost absurd reduction to a level where we can be sure we'll get the political output that we personally want, means we'll have the small tiny Republic of Traquair at some point in 100 years, never mind an independent Scotland in the meantime. Now, I do accept that people can argue, and they do very passionately, Michael has just done it, that we can be more certain of Scotland and its values if we are an independent country. We have a nation, we have a historical legal entity as an independent country, all of that is true. But within Scotland, not just geographically, but within different bits of Scotland, we have a whole range of people. One of the great factoids thrown around at the present time is the fact that something like 800,000 people who regard themselves as Scottish, born in Scotland, and have moved south of the border. Something like nearly 500,000 people from other parts of the United Kingdom now live in Scotland. People in England who think that they are Scottish resent the fact they're not getting part of this vote. People in Scotland who are from England are very comfortable here, but many don't want the prospect of being in a foreign country. And as somebody who was actually born in Northern Ireland, but has lived almost all his life here in Scotland, proudly consider myself a Scot, I think my family and my friends represented here this afternoon and elsewhere are just a small example of a bigger truth, that we are a real mix of identities, that we can be proud of being Scottish or living in Scotland, because not everybody here is Scottish or thinks of themselves as such. We can be proud of the fact that we've got our own parliament getting stronger, but we can still be part of the United Kingdom. Why turn our backs on that?
Michael.
Well, this, of course, is true of many nations in the modern world. The whole global population has become more mobile, so that 20% of the population of France is foreign-born, 15% of the population of Germany, and so on. I mean, in the United States, you have a whole nation composed of immigrants, essentially, or the recent descendants of immigrants. I mean, this, of course, we're all mixed up, and identities have become more fluid. But this doesn't seem to me to preclude taking rationally, politically rational decisions about what is best for yourself, for your own community.
That is a very different thing.
Well, I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure it is. I mean, if we look, if you look at in the kind of analysis that Billy Connolly would use on in socio-economic terms, England and Scotland are practically identical. Class structure of industry. There's 1 or 2% difference in particular sectors, but really they're essentially the same. So you can say to that extent, the union has succeeded, and that's a relatively new development. You could say the late 20th century brought the work of 1707 to a triumphant conclusion. But socio and economic terms do not fully comprehend any particular society. And in political terms, obviously Scotland has diverged in that time. Why, on this Marxist analysis, why do you get this sudden divergence when people's socio and economic interests are coming together? And obviously in cultural terms, there's always been a difference, largely ignored, I'm sorry to say, in the general run, among the general run of Scottish historians. But what has kept Scottish nationhood alive during 300 years? Obviously, the culture has kept people alive, and to a certain extent, the politics, because Scottish politics was always a kind of subsystem of the British system, and I've written lots of books about this, which you may care to buy.
Yes.
So you can say the glory of the Union is that it never tried to merge, let alone coerce its different peoples into merger. But you can also say that at the back of everybody's minds, I think in 1707 and 1801, there was always the chance that the constituent nations might want to demerge. The Irish took that opportunity in 1922, and now the Scots have that opportunity, and it's going to be relatively painless. It's not going to lead to bloodshed.
Okay,
it's going to be relatively easy, and that was all part of the Union deal.
Come in, Stephen.
Can I just pick up? I want to pick up on something that Michael said, but firstly, Michael Fry made a good point there. This is about democratic accountability and people in Edinburgh and people in Scotland getting the government that they vote for. Now, we're in very rare earth at the moment. As Michael pointed out to me before we came in, this is actually David Mundell's constituency, so you're sitting in a Tory constituency. It's rare earth indeed in Scotland. But what this is about, and this is where I'd like to pick Michael up, and I think he missed the point a little bit about why we're going for independence with respect, is that it's not about bringing things down to be smaller. It's about Scotland making its own decisions, and it's not about your ethnicity. Michael picked up on ethnicity. It's got nothing to do with that. I was at an English Scots for Yes event the other day. This is all about Scots, people who live in Scotland that are committed to living in Scotland, being able to make decisions for themselves. And if I can just pick up on one more point.
Yeah,
sorry,
that's fine.
sorry.
No, carry on.
James.
Yeah, no, you get it.
Alex Salmond made, if you like, last Thursday, he was at, it was earlier this week, he was at Arbroath making his big pitch. And his big pitch was of three things. One of them was the NHS, one of them was growing the economy, and the third one was about population size. Now, the SNP is, and I think the Yes campaign are a pro-immigration party. We want people to come to Scotland. The country needs people to come to this country. Our population has collapsed over the past, not in recent times, but beyond that. It's only been the past 10 years. And at the moment, because of immigration policies, which are suited to the southeast of England, we're losing key members of staff and it's affecting small businesses. So with respect, Michael, I think you're missing the point on why we're going down this route. It's got nothing to do with ethnicity. It's got everything to do with making decisions that affect those who live here.
Okay, if it's got nothing to do with ethnicity,
Yep.
if it's not a Braveheart campaign, and it is a pragmatic next step, which
Yep.
is the way the First Minister likes to put it, why on earth is he proposing a currency union which would hand back fiscal sovereignty to the Bank of England, having just taken it away in the referendum?
Well,
That's not independence.
I'm glad we got this far in without mentioning currency union for a start.
But I
which
think
is
a lot
nice.
of people would want it mentioned.
But it's a fair point to bring up. I mean, on this one thing that's interested me about the economic debate is that you had politicians on the no side saying there'll be no currency union without actually looking behind some of the facts. The Scottish Government, to its credit, set up a fiscal commission working group looking at the best economic case for both sides, and that came out as a currency union. Now, the very first thing that an independent Scotland does on day one, it elects the government that the people of Scotland would like to see. Now, it may be if Patrick Harvey gets his way and the leader of the Green Party becomes First Minister, there is no currency union.
Or the
But if-
chairman of the Yes campaign who thinks it's idiotic.
well, who thinks so? This is the great thing about it. If the Scots vote for a government that they want, they get that government. And if that means a currency union, if the SNP happen to be elected and Alex Salmond's the Prime Minister of an independent Scotland, you get your currency union.
Well, do you think, just on this point, I want to throw it back to Michael Moore,
Sure.
Because he's got questions to answer on this as well. Do you think that if there were a yes vote, accepting that the sovereign will of the Scottish people is accepted by everyone as sovereign in the business of deciding whether we stay or go from the United Kingdom, do you think that in the event of a yes vote, the 94% of people who would use the currency union who are not in Scotland should have a right to decide whether it's a good idea or not?
I think that they have to have a say. Yes, of course they do, because
What if they say no?
they'll have their own democratic government.
Yeah,
But
what if they say no?
Well, if they say no, then you have to look at other options, and other options are set out in the white paper. But the reason I think they'll say yes is that I'm an Anglophile. I'm lucky enough to be married I've got an English wife and English relatives down in the southeast of England. England's always struck me as a very sensible country. It's a very business-friendly country. So why on earth a government coming in would want to penalise its own businesses by throwing its toys out the pram in the event of independence? It just doesn't make sense.
Don't want this issue to hog the whole hour, but it's an important one. Michael Moore.
Well, just if I may, and I know it's a bit cheeky to try and answer two questions before yours, Jim, but
It's typical.
I'm not.
Not of you, but of your
I'm not
class.
saying this is about ethnicity. I think we need actually to be really careful it's not, because anybody in this room, even if it's not themselves, but thinking of their wider family and social circle, will think of a very diverse group of people. My two sisters, who were very proudly, for them, born in Inverness, currently in the East End of London and Florida, are very proudly Scottish, regardless of where they happen to live. The values thing too, I think we need to be careful of. I don't want a values test applied as you come across the border to say, do you have values consistent with the people of Scotland so that you may live here? You know, it's about democracy and working out where things are best decided. As a Liberal, I want things as close to the people affected by them as possible, but recognising that international problems go beyond boundaries, we ought to be partnered with others to make some of those big decisions together. I think the UK presents a great opportunity for that. On the currency union, I think that it's a very strange debate to be having. I fundamentally think that the Fiscal Commission came up with a currency union as the best outcome because they were thrown the question, well, what can we do to make the best of being independent? Say, well, actually, let's have a currency union. Hey, we've got that at the moment. It works pretty well for us. What kind of independence might it represent? And the democratic reality that south of the border, a much bigger country, 10 times our size, Stephen, would have very different interests and could quite probably say no to a currency union. It's something that is just totally absent from Alex's
But
world.
let me ask you a question, which is one that your side has to address as well. If there were a yes vote, and you alluded earlier to the possibility and what Scotland would have to be like if there were a yes vote. If there were a yes vote, what kind of currency would you fight for as a Scottish MP?
Well, personally, I would hate having lost the argument. I'd be currency union or a separate currency would be the two things.
Would
we'd
you
have
try
to
to push a
explore.
currency union, despite the fact that your party and
Yeah,
the two biggest parties in Westminster have said that they think it's a bad idea?
I have said consistently, and I'm happy to repeat it this afternoon, if we vote to become independent, then I'm there with everybody else trying to make the best.
But do you think a
arrangements for
currency
Scotland.
union would be the best solution?
It's the least worst option of what we then have
So
pitched
you agree with
ourselves
Alex
into.
Salmond on that?
I'm quite happy. No, I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy to argue for a currency union. Quite happy to argue for that currency union. I'm happily not the person who ruled it out. When I was still in the government, we talked about it being highly unlikely, and I think that's actually the most sensible place
Danny
for us
Alexander's
to
ruled
be.
it out.
He and Ed Balls and George Osborne have collectively said it won't happen. I think that has slightly obscured the debate in Scotland about why on earth would we want a currency
Okay,
union?
fair enough.
Why would that be best for our economy? It's not why we were told independence was coming.
Fry, you're an economist. A quick one.
Well, you still have, even in a currency union, you still have full fiscal, complete, utter fiscal autonomy. I mean, the best that your party or any other party is offering is 40% fiscal autonomy. So even with currency union, you've got full fiscal autonomy, a far greater access to the levers of economic power than any unionist party is offering. And I think that is worth having, even with...
Mark Carney doesn't agree with that.
Yes, he does, but he's not concerned with fiscal policy. Fiscal policy.
No, he's
is
concerned
not
with
his cup of
stability
tea.
of a currency union.
So he's concerned with monetary policy.
Yes.
And he will do whatever he can, and he will do what he has to do to maintain the stability of the currency, but that still leaves full fiscal autonomy, absolute fiscal autonomy. And the governor of the Bank of England is an organisation completely separate from government, as your old friend...
Michael,
okay, but we
can
still...
Fiscal spend and borrow as much as it
fiscal
wants?
independence is fiscal independence. Within the parameters, all governments operate under constraints.
Well, okay, I want to open this up to questions
you
before
have
too long.
absolute
Let
fiscal
me
independence.
come on, you can go back on this to questions. I just want to raise a couple of other things. Why did Alex Salmond raise fears about the NHS the other day, when anything that's happened to the NHS in Scotland for the last 7 years is as a consequence of his policy?
Well, it's not entirely a consequence of his policy. No, James, that's not the case, and you know it's not the case, because if you leave your financial levers in London, how much money you have to spend on the NHS is decided by London. It's not decided by Edinburgh.
Well, hang on. He's got 40 billion to play with every year at the moment.
No, he's not. He's got about 30. It's been going down. It's
Well,
about 32,
yeah,
33.
well,
So it's
well,
about 25%
okay.
less.
Well,
okay.
let's. Now, I understand the argument that says if spending on the NHS in the rest of the UK goes down, then under the formula it has an impact. Now, that's a perfectly fair point. But fundamentally, you know that Alex Salmond has got his block grant, and just like old secretaries of state for Scotland in the days before Michael held that office, could use the money for basically anything they wanted. So you could take a bit from roads, a bit from schools, stick it here. Now, the policies that have been applied to the NHS by Alec Neil, the current holder of the office, are his policies. They're not the policies of my old friend Jeremy Hunt.
Yeah, but
Just did that, so that was okay. Anyway.
That's when overnight you became everyone's favourite
yes,
broadcaster.
well, indeed. No, but I mean, that is the fundamental truth of it.
No, look. It is written. Now, this is actually there's a democratic issue with the Scottish Parliament, which I'm sure most people agree with, which is it's allowed to make political decisions, but not really have that much in the way of financial accountability.
Yeah, but the
I think that's wrong.
But the NHS can't be privatised in Scotland by the UK government.
Let me finish the point. If there's a cut, so the Scottish government, the block grant only makes up a fraction of overall Scottish spending.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
It only makes up a small fraction.
Yeah.
So within that small block grant, at the moment, about a third goes on local government, about a third on the NHS, a third on everything else.
That's right.
Now, if you're cutting it down south of the border and pursuing a more privatised path, you can no longer pursue those as priorities because you do not have the financial powers. Now, if you have an NHS, whether you like it or not, it's expensive. You're going to spend money on it.
Yeah.
If you as a country choose to spend money on it, that is your democratic right to spend money on it. And at the moment, we do do not have that particular power.
Well, I acknowledge. I mean, I think you've got a perfectly fair argument on the money front and the difference it makes. Some of that would be dealt with, of course, by proposals of the other parties in the event of a no vote. But my question to you is this: do you believe that the NHS in Scotland, and this is the fear that has been raised in the last few days, could effectively be privatised over the head of the Scottish government? Because I don't see how that could happen.
There's a possibility in the sense that if you have a policy divergence south of the border as a knock-on consequence north of the border, I mean, education's a classic example where you have policy divergences
But not a
there,
complete
and
knock-on.
therefore, but they have, I mean, if they have an accumulative impact.
Sure.
So what happens south of the border, because they have the financial levers, they're the ones that count, and they're the ones, and that's why they've not handed them over yet.
Okay, fair. Michael, just a quick one on
Yeah,
this.
well, let's remember that if Stephen's argument is essentially that we are currently shortchanged, or we might be shortchanged for our National Health Service in the future. The Scottish variable rate is a power that the Parliament has had since it began. For
3% either,
three pence in the pound.
Pennies.
Pretty minimal. So it was used by nobody, but it was regarded so pathetic that in fact they didn't even pay the money required to keep the thing functioning. But that's one option. We could put taxes up, because one of Scotland's best kept secrets, the Scotland Act of 2012.
Yeah, it is a secret.
I say this as the person who took it through the House of Commons. That will, in a couple of years, in 2016, mean that half of our income tax here in Scotland is set by the Scottish Parliament. So if our MSPs wish us to spend more on our public services, they can put up our taxes. They can make the case for that, they make that argument. That's nothing to do with independence, nothing to do with an English agenda on the NHS, which I have to say my party certainly rejects the notion of it being privatised. And let's again not be democratic fearties who are not willing to make the arguments across the whole of the UK about our NHS. So we really do need to get this in perspective.
Okay.
And maybe ask another question.
Well,
why 15 years into devolution, our health outcomes are not better than they were before?
Right. Look, can I just ask each of you, I'm going to go to questions now, but I want each of you just in a couple of sentences, and really keep this brief because we want time for questions, to say what you think. We know there's a great debate tomorrow night. What do you think is going to make the difference as an issue, as a question, from your perspective? What's going to make the difference between now and polling day? Katie?
Well, I think that one of the things is realism is going to make a difference. I hear and I'm not a politician in any sense of the word, and I hear on either side, what I hear from the Yes campaign, which puts me off, is this utter certainty. The only person I've ever heard from the Yes campaign who's been remotely realistic was Andrew Wilson, who spoke very, very well about the fact that we could make terrible mistakes, that it might not all be rosy in the garden, and all that kind of thing. Other than that, all we hear is certainty. This will happen, life will be better. So I think that I think that the idea of England being a competitor rather than a partner will kick in, but I also think that realism will kick in. What is better for people's lives? And not just for people who can afford their lives, but for people who actually can't really afford things.
Okay, I'm going to cut you short because I want this to be brief. Michael, just very briefly, what do you think is going to be the decisive thought that people take with them into the polling booth?
Sometimes there are days of hope. Most of us live boring, normal lives. We live in a United Kingdom which has been in half a century of decline and doesn't seem to realise it and still wanders around the world trying to act as a great power. But sometimes you can make a leap and you can suddenly make things better. It's not a certainty, but the gamble is worth it. And I think that's what will make the difference on
Michael.
September the 18th.
I think we hopefully can go in there proud of Scotland and proud of our place in the United Kingdom, and with a zeal to reform the United Kingdom, because certainly the status quo is not something I want to put up with.
Stephen?
I think the big thing, I think your original question was about tomorrow night.
Well, yes,
okay.
and
I mean,
the
it's fair
campaign,
point.
yeah. But
I think one thing that needs to happen, it's probably something that we all agree on actually, is that Alex Salmond and Alistair Darling need to pitch their visions, if you like, beyond journalists and almost beyond the goldfish bowl to the many people who still haven't made up their mind and maybe don't listen to Radio 4 every
think it
morning.
could make a difference?
Yeah.
Fine. Okay, let's get some questions. There are roving mics. There's a gentleman in the middle of the back row, and then there are 2 or 3 over here, so we can get a mic. Is there more than one mic rattling around? Get it down here, because there's about 3 people there. Yeah, fire away.
Could I just say, before I get to my question,
As briefly as you can.
Yeah, relative to what's been said, I think the reason why we're having a debate today on the independence issue is because Holyrood, prior to where we are now, was basically turning into a little bit of a circus. Down in Westminster, the politicians weren't happy with the 5-star lifestyle. They were dipping their fingers in the expenses. So the people of Scotland decided enough was enough. And as you full rightly must know, Holyrood was set up not for a majority government. But that's exactly what happened. I need to set that out. I'm not a political character.
No,
Common
just
sense.
give us a question.
Right.
Yeah.
That said, let's not blame the SNP. Political persuasions I've listened to generally say the SNP have done a good job. Whichever party.
Yeah.
Now the
Question,
question
please.
is,
Yeah.
given the size of our national debt, which will take many generations of our youth to pay off, that's if they ever do.
Yeah.
Coupled with the unsustainable national debt of countries in Europe, such as Spain, Italy,
Yeah. Okay.
Greece.
We take that point. Yeah.
You take the point because it's a common sense
Yeah. We'll just
stuff.
come to a conclusion.
The point I'm making here is, does the panel think that this is a prudent time, given the instability of the Middle East and so on, plus the pound, is it feasible at this juncture to go forward? And if the answer is yes, what route do we take, Europe or the Commonwealth?
Okay, Stephen.
Sure. Katie said earlier on, she's not heard people from saying that we'll make mistakes. If we've got an independent Scotland, well, of course we'll make a lot of mistakes. There's no government can say that we'll never make mistakes. But as with the national debt point, the gentleman's pointed out, the UK government has made a lot of mistakes. So people have got to make up their mind, who do you trust to make less mistakes going forward? On the national debt point, we do need to come together and work together, which is why it strikes me as unusual that England at the moment seems to be turning its back on European Union membership, especially at this time when we need to be building trading blocks.
Do you think that's... I'm not going to get you all to answer every question, because otherwise we'd be here all afternoon and we wouldn't get questions. I want to get into them. I'll just take you on this one. Do you think the European issue is one that troubles people?
I think it is. It troubles... I mean, the great thing about the independence debate is different people are troubled about different issues and will decide on different issues. We won't all decide on one issue.
Do you think the idea that the UK might come out of Europe is a point?
I mean, one thing that surprised me, and it's where I made a mistake, was I used to think that anti-Europeanism was probably eeksy-peeksy in Scotland and England, but all the polls that have come out recently have showed that Scotland will vote to stay in, whereas the rest of the United Kingdom, and England in particular, will vote to leave. So if Scotland votes to remain in the United Kingdom, we could see ourselves be taken out of the European Union against our will in 2017.
Let's try and get a range of questions here. Yeah, whoever's got the mic, and then we'll pass it around quickly. Yeah.
Billy Connolly was referenced, particularly with a problem for many socialists in Scotland, the idea that if you go independent, you're turning your back on people in England in a similar situation to you. The truth is, within any trade union movement or within any empathetic fight involving workers, people never turn their backs on anyone. What people are turning their backs on is the way Labour represents those workers in England, and a feeling that through Westminster they do not represent people fairly. Of course, people will not turn their backs on other ordinary people. People will continue to support people.
Do you think that if there is a yes vote, it will be because of the failure of the Labour Party, as you see it?
I think that's a big issue.
Michael?
Well, I'm not here to speak for the Labour Party. Did I say it in a moment of revelation? My own party has enough issues to keep looking at and so on. But I just reject the idea that by creating a boundary or a line between us, we'll somehow make it easier to help those people in Liverpool or Newcastle. We need to have these debates across the whole of the United Kingdom. We have got some massive challenges facing us. At a time when the world is getting more uncertain, when the challenges are getting, frankly, more frightening and more challenging, at that moment, it seems an odd moment to scale down our political aspirations. Let's scale them up. Let's be confident as Scots within Scotland, within the United Kingdom, and within Europe. Because I have a very simple transfer of arguments. I think Scotland is better as part of the United Kingdom, and the United Kingdom better as part of Europe, and long may that continue.
What if there's a no vote and the UK voted to come out of the European Union in 2017 against the wishes of you and your party? And the SNP said to people here, let's assume for the sake of this argument they'd been re-elected in 2016 at Holyrood, they said, there you are, we warned you it would happen, and it's happened, and farmers in Scotland, who overwhelmingly, as I understand it from the polls, want to remain in the European Union, had been taken out, whereas if they had voted yes, they would still be in the European Union in one form or another.
Well, I want to believe that Scotland will be staying part of the European Union under any of these different scenarios, but the current biggest risk to our membership of the European Union is by voting for independence. Because we meet all the national standards and all that kind of stuff at the moment, but there is not a single serious person anywhere else in Europe who has actually agreed with the special way in which the SNP believes that we will negotiate our way in. Let us accept. Well, however,
this is a very important argument.
I don't want Stephen to get sidetracked by the.
Well, if you be brief, and then we'll bring him in on it.
Let's assume that we can get back in. The length of time that takes and the uncertainty of the terms of that membership is hugely critical to those very farmers you're just talking about. Because from the 19th of September onwards, they do not know what currency they'll be using, they do not know what level of subsidy they'll be getting, they don't know what particular terms of the Common Agricultural Policy will apply to them at some uncertain point in the future. That is not a great way for very vulnerable businesses to plan their future.
Just before I throw this to Stephen, do I take it from that answer that what you mean is that you don't believe that, as a matter of principle, Scotland is going to be, an independent Scotland would be excluded from the European Union? What you're arguing about is the length of time and the nature of the terms of continuing membership that would be negotiated.
The terms and the length of time it takes to get in are the critical things, and the disruption involved is massive.
Right,
and they duck it every time.
I mean, I think that with respect, Michael, I think when people are getting frustrated about being thrown sort of red herrings, I think the European Union one is one. European Union is a political institution that finds political solutions to its problems, just like when it took in 17 million East Germans almost overnight at the time of German unification against all its rules. Now, Scotland is a net contributor to the European Union with its biggest fossil fuel resources and its biggest renewable resources. The very thought that the European Union will not bend over backwards to make sure we find a solution. Now, hold on, and let me finish this point, seems to be a nonsense. Now, don't just take my word for it. If you go out there and you look at almost any expert, be it Graham Avery, who's the Honorary Secretary General of the European Commission and was responsible for 18 accession processes, Professor Michael Keating, who stayed out
well, what about Rumpy Pumpy?
They all agree with that. Now, Rumpy Pumpy was an interesting one because with Rumpy Pumpy, with Herman van Rompuy, he's somebody who's a political person, just like Barroso, a political person as well.
It's a political organisation.
And as a political organisation, they made a political point. What interested me, and again about this misnomer, is when Juncker became the president-elect, the No campaign were sitting there telling us that Scotland would get chucked out, only for Juncker's official spokesperson to say we didn't make that point.
No, but
and yet,
come on,
the Prime Minister still ran with it.
But that's a very fair point. But I want to put the point I put to Michael. You see, most sensible people, I would say, don't believe for a minute that the European Union would want to exclude an independent Scotland. Let's just dispense with that. The question is the time and the terms, not the principle. And you're absolutely right about that. On the terms, you know perfectly well that the vast majority of members of the European Union cannot bear the special treatment that the UK got as a result of the major negotiations of the 1990s, including rebates and all the rest of it. Now, the question for you is whether you believe that it is credible that the European Union would allow those special provisions to continue for an independent Scotland or not.
Firstly, we're in a financial period going up to 2020, so those finances have been sorted out, and then it's up to Scotland to negotiate it in 2020.
Exactly.
So what terms do we get?
So Scotland will go. Well, Scotland will negotiate its terms. Also, as Michael Keating said, it was Michael Keating himself who pointed out on the rebate that Scotland takes its share of the rebate. So don't listen to me as a political person telling you one thing. I like to go to the people who say I'm not yes or no, but here are some of the facts. And on the European issue, it's been overwhelmingly good for yes. The other thing is this. The one thing that will need to happen is that Scotland will renegotiate its membership, its membership of the European Union and what applies. Actually, we don't get a great deal at the moment. Now, we're in an area, and Michael represents an area, of overwhelming farming interest. Per utilised agricultural area, because we're part of the UK, Scotland gets the lowest share of cap spending of any part. It gets the lowest share of
per farm, we get the highest.
Yeah. Per utilised agricultural area, we get the lowest.
We can trade statistics. We can trade statistics all day. I think this gets down to simple things about what assumptions. The assumptions from the SNP are all heroically ambitious. there is an assumption it will be automatically
Normal.
agreed, which is fine. I think that's a fair assumption. And yet, there are other countries out there. It just takes one of them to be a little bit hesitant because of what this might mean for their own country, and there'll be a bit of delay. In terms of the terms, we're not only going to get better terms on farming, we're also going to keep the best terms that the UK has already got, including on border controls. We're going to be outside. We're going to be outside the Schengen arrangement. We'll have a common travel area with the rest of the UK, like Ireland, which, broadly speaking, has the same immigration policy as us. But Stephen himself earlier on said we need a very different immigration policy, one that will bring a lot more people into the country, which would certainly tackle our demographic challenges. But Croatia, the most recent member of the European Union, got its membership approved, got the terms negotiated, then took 2 years for the treaties to be ratified by all members of the European Union. So just
that was
a
because
simple
of a border
bit.
dispute with Slovenia. We don't have a borders dispute with
No,
England,
but we will
Michael.
have created a lot of interesting precedents for Spain, for Romania, for France, for Italy, for others who will be thinking, what on earth is all this about?
Do you
So
think,
all I'm
you think
asking-
an independent Scotland would be in Schengen or not?
No. I mean, why? I mean, Ireland's not in Schengen. Why would you create a,
So you
a,
keep
a
the same
policies
border
as
the rest
and
of the
for us
UK.
to go into Schengen?
So you
It wouldn't-
keep
it
the
wouldn't
same
make
immigration
sense.
policy
It
as the
wouldn't
rest
make
of the
sense.
UK.
No, what you could do, and the Irish have done. The Irish do not have
No, but
exactly
you couldn't
the same
have
immigration policy.
you couldn't have different immigration
No,
policies
but you
here
can have,
and
you can
without
have
a
different
border.
rules around workers. Now, at the moment, we're seeing a number of workers who are being sent home because of immigration policy that's based on London and the southeast. And you must know, Michael, that there are small businesses. I know from the area I come from,
I
in
can have that.
Perthshire.
But I'm a liberal.
small-
I
small
argue
businesses
for
who are
more
suffering
Well, look, I
from
think
people being...
this could go on all afternoon, and it's very, very interesting. I think you both had a good say in it, but there's a gentleman with another question here.
Right. How many people in this room wouldn't want to have less government? I would think in the whole of Britain, there are a great number of us who would love to see less government. And here on the 18th of September, we have a unique opportunity to get rid of one enormous layer of government, and it's called Westminster. Could I have your comment?
Right, Michael.
Well, I agree with the questioner. I mean, as a side of myself I haven't really revealed so far is that I'm a libertarian. And so my emphasis is quite different from most of the Yes campaign, or indeed most of the politicians in Scotland, who all want more and more and more government. One of the reasons why I support Scottish independence is that we would then come face to face with some realities of the country we live in. We've grown up with generations of a dependency culture, which I think has been very bad for us. It means that the Scottish economy underperforms. It means that Scottish society underperforms.
Essentially what you're arguing is the Adam Smith Institute argument for yes, which is that the economic circumstances after a yes vote would be such that any government would have to slash public spending to the core, which as a libertarian is what you want to see.
It depends what you mean by the core. I mean, I think we should follow
Or deep cuts.
Well, just listen to what I'm going to say. I think we should follow a steady policy over the years, as is being followed by the present government, as was followed by the previous government, as was followed by the government before that, and as was followed by the government before that, right back to the great economic crisis of the IMF of 1976, of steadily reducing the state's share in the disposition of national income.
Is that what an SNP government would want?
I think that what an SNP government, well, we'll have to see the manifesto when it comes out.
Oh,
but
come on.
But I think in fairness, what the SNP government will do will be they'll campaign for where they are at the moment, which is reasonably socially just taxation policy. And actually, in fairness, possibly where the Labour Party might be if the Labour Party in Scotland was independent of the Labour Party south of the border. It'll be quite an interesting 2016 general election campaign.
It certainly will be. Look, we've got another question here. Have you got the mic? Yeah.
Yes, I have,
And then who's got the one next?
Yeah.
Just put up a hand.
This is really, Jim, a question for Michael. I understand...
Which Michael?
That Michael, sorry,
Right, Michael Moore. Yeah.
I understand... You said it. I understand that of all the jurisdictions that have devolution in Europe, Scotland currently has the greatest devolved powers. You talked about, research, Young 2010. Michael, you took the 2012 Act through Parliament, as you've just said. Why is it that Better Together have not made much more of the devolved powers that we shall get in 2016 if we vote no.
That's a
because
good question.
It is a really
Why do more people
vital
not
question.
know about it?
It is an entirely fair question, and I take the entire blame for the failure of us to get this idea across. Although I have to say, by the time I was negotiating with the First Minister and others to conclude the terms of that Act, which were largely as the original bill has set out, by that stage there was this whole matter of the referendum occupying more of the political debate. We kept being told that it would be an irrelevance, and Stephen obviously hopes still that that will be the case. I've been doing a whole series of meetings across the borders over the last 6 months. I totted up the other day, there'll be 28 of them by the time we get to the 18th of September, and that's just in one small part of the country. And one of them I did in Greenlaw recently, a lady came up to me afterwards, and I talked about devolution, how it's evolved, how it's responsive, how it's flexible, how I'm confident it will develop further towards what Liberals would call home rule. And she said, that bit where you said that the Scottish Parliament will have responsibility for half of our income taxes in 2 years, she said, was that true? And I could tell she was deadly fearful of this outcome. Now, I sorted that particular concern away, but it was a good example of this general problem. In 2012, we passed an Act which means that from 2016, half of our income tax is set by the Scottish Parliament. And there's a clause in the Act which means that without the need for the full panoply of Acts of Parliament and other things in Scotland, we will be able to pass other taxes from Westminster to the Scottish Parliament by order. Relatively simple procedure. The same procedure that allowed us to pass the power to hold a referendum from Westminster to Scottish Parliament so it could rightly be made in Scotland. We have a very flexible arrangement with devolution, and it's for us in Scotland to decide how much we want to use of that. If we choose independence, we've decided, hang that, we're going for the whole lot. But we have in our hands the ability to do a lot more.
Very quick
I
response
think I'll make
to
it
that,
quick.
and then-
I'll leave the history to Michael, but in 1979 we were promised all sorts of devolution and it never turned
Oh, wait,
up.
you're referring to
I
the
s-
Alec Douglas-Hume intervention?
Well, the Alec Douglas-Hume
That was
and
one interview.
And the
one
Margaret
interview,
Thatcher one as
2
well.
weeks ago.
I mean, when you're promised all sorts of different things, they don't happen. I'm not sure why we can trust them a second time.
You don't think this...
There's more coming.
you
Well,
think-
the parties can't agree on what kind of devolution, so that there is no proposal
But
at
the
the
Yes
moment.
campaign
The
can't agree on our
parties
currency,
can't
so
agree.
I mean,
what we
what?
can agree on the Yes
This is
campaign
politics.
is to have a fair
No,
election.
but that's a fair
like-
point. You can't agree on a currency in the Yes campaign,
Well, no,
can you?
no, of course not, because we recognise our people
Oh,
from
right,
different
right, so that's fine.
So
points
that's-
of view.
independent
So,
countries.
so people can disagree in
It's
the
a
no
matter
campaign.
of fact, and you'll stand on that proposal in the 2016 election.
Yeah, let's get questions. So, we've got politicians up here. That's the problem, right? Let's get three at once. Be quick.
So a
Pass the microphone around.
Question for Michael Moore. What do you say to people in Scotland, and women in particular, who are no longer prepared to have their taxes spent on weapons of mass destruction?
Right, and the lady just in front of you, and then along, and then along. Right.
Can you tell me what, if any, difference an independence in Scotland would make to the land reform agenda?
Right, and then the lady who had her hand up just a minute ago there, with the red hair, just behind, in the row behind. You're the one who said you wanted to ask a question.
I just said, can we have some questions?
All right, okay. Is there anybody else there? You've got a little... Yeah, you chuck one in as well.
Given the length of time the current administration has been in power, and given the state of the economy
In Edinburgh or in London?
in Edinburgh,
Right.
how on earth can you convince me that the next few years you will do any better than you've done in the last few
Okay,
years?
weapons of mass destruction, land reform, and the record of the SNP government. Weapons of mass destruction, Michael Moore.
Weapons of mass destruction, if you're opposed to nuclear weapons, as I would take that to be, then, yes, you might decide that independence is the quickest route to getting rid of them, and that's a legitimate perspective. I think, generally speaking, we want to get rid of them across the whole world, and we want to get it, the argument applies across the whole United Kingdom. And bear in mind, we are apparently going to sign up to NATO, which is a nuclear club, and even though we might not have nuclear weapons in Faz Lane anymore at some point in the future, we'd still be under a nuclear umbrella. Let's make the argument for getting rid of them altogether. My view is,
Do you want to come back on that? Do you want to come back on that just very quickly? Just very quickly, yeah.
You announced that Trident would be upgraded and remain in Scotland, the coalition, and
coalition takes
also
different views on
Labour,
this, to be honest.
without consultation to the Scottish Parliament.
But there will be an election shortly where, if we haven't voted for independence, this will be a legitimate issue, as it has been in every election I've fought, and my predecessor, sitting in the second row here,
All I
fought
would
over the
say
previous
was,
30 years.
but do we not have the opportunity to start this process on September the 18th? We could begin the process of disarmament.
Fair enough, but let me just suggest to you that we then, it sits ill at ease with the NATO pledge, which the SNP have already taken, and a practical reality, it will take a very long time to do. I just don't want us to lose sight of the need to make the argument across the whole UK to get rid of these weapons on a multilateral basis.
Come on. There were two other questions. I'm going to put them to Stephen. One was land reform, what effect would have, and the other one was the record of the government which you support. Yes,
on economic development. Very briefly on the nuclear issue, and I'm glad that the lady brought it up. I mean, Michael's just talked about that we've been campaigning on this for years. Campaigning on it for years, and we've had nuclear weapons for years.
Why do you want to join a nuclear
There's
club?
only one way to get rid of nuclear weapons, and that's to vote for independence.
But why do you want to
Secondly,
join
on NATO, 90% of NATO members, 25 out of 28 NATO members, do not have nuclear weapons.
Which other country has ever joined NATO and as a consequence has got rid of nuclear weapons that are already stationed
there are countries like Norway who've said no to nuclear. Now the very thought that England as well would want to leave. Remember, the entire nuclear arsenal of the United Kingdom is on Scottish soil.
Yeah.
Now you would have an international
true,
precedent there. Well, it's in Scottish waters then, when it's not out at sea patrolling, waiting for nuclear Armageddon. But the very thought that the English would like to leave it there seems a misnomer. Now, the government of which Michael was a part overestimated the cost of shifting it. But do you know what? There needs to be a replacement for Trident. The best way to get rid of it throughout the UK is to vote for independence,
hang on.
and I think that'll focus
just on a
the
point
mind.
just on a point of fact
Sure.
here. It's a perfectly well-known position that that you take that get the Trident bases out of Scotland. You would accept, though, that with membership of NATO, which is what your government wants, armed Trident boats would still be in Scottish waters.
Well, temporarily until they could be moved.
No. They would still have access. They would still patrol in Scottish. As a member of NATO, you would have to allow that.
It would be up to the
If
government.
you don't want that to happen, you can't be in NATO.
Of 90% of NATO countries, it's up to the governments about whether or not they give access to nuclear.
It's in the NATO Charter.
If they give access to
Why
them,
on earth do you want to be in NATO?
We want to be in NATO. Well, it was a decision which, again, the
It's a
SNP
nuclear alliance.
took democratically, but it's an alliance that has, that we believe, and some people disagree, and that's fair enough, that has a future in international peacekeeping.
It's a nuclear alliance.
It's a nuclear alliance in which 3 countries out of the 28 have nuclear weapons.
Which all of them are agreed that they will support the use of. Through NATO.
The best way to get rid of nuclear weapons is to vote for independence, and therefore there will
There
not
was
be
a land
investment.
reform
Anyway,
question.
the land
Quick one on land reform.
I think quickly on land reform, then the ladies on the economic development. On land reform, that's obviously up to the governments elected. I won't go into it in too much detail, but there was a land reform report that came out that pointed the direction of where the SNP is going for it. Others will go a different way. And on the economic development, what strikes me is that the Scottish Government has got very, very few financial powers. Where it does, in areas like trying to encourage investment, Scotland has been top of the league for attracting internal investment after London. So in terms of getting investment in, the Scottish Government's done quite well with a minimum amount. We don't even have powers over tax, corporation tax, or any of these areas that we can give us proper financial levers to tackle the economy.
Very quick one, Michael Fry.
Also, I say, look not just at what governments say, but look at what they do. And the present Scottish Government has been a tax-cutting government. It cut business rates, and in real terms, it has cut the community charge. So you can, even within the limited powers it has, you can pursue your own agenda. What it doesn't have, and Stephen's quite, doesn't have macroeconomic policies, macroeconomic fiscal policies, and those are the ones that can be...
Quick one here,
difference.
Sorry, I didn't actually get an answer there on land reform, because I know it's up to the governments elected, but I want to know whether they'll have more levers than they do currently. Can you just answer that?
What, in the event of independence?
Yes.
Yeah,
well, of course they would.
Yeah, she'll have the full suite of powers.
No argument about that.
They will have more levers on land reform in the event of independence. Yeah.
Well, it'll be an independent country. So it's got any levers it wants.
But it's already devolved. It's already a devolved issue.
Well, some aspects.
Yeah, but it depends which government you elect.
No, but it's already devolved, so it doesn't necessarily depend on that. I mean, we're either going to have more powers over it, or it's going to be the
Well,
same?
you have any powers that... I mean, it's an independent country. The government's got any powers it wants.
But we're
if it's
partially
elected to do
independent
it.
already.
And it's whether or not you use those powers, I suppose, is a
No,
big question.
I think we're going round in circles on that one. A quick one here. George, it's you.
To the two Michaels, really. If we get a no vote and we get this more and more asymmetrical devolution to Scotland, take your word, Michael, doesn't that not in itself create tensions within the UK? They go back to Michael's
This is a
original
good point. We're at wind-up time, and George Caravan's asked a very good question, which I think I'll put to everybody. In the event of a no vote, which is what he postulates for this, taking his point about asymmetrical devolution, and what are the implications down the road, and I want all of you to take this on.
Yeah, well, if I may inappropriately plug a charity walk I'm doing this week from the source of the tweet to the mouth of the tweet, all 97 miles of it starting
Guess which one of them's a politician? Anyway.
And if you haven't had enough here today, the referendum blethers I'm doing with David Parker, who supports independence, in the Tontine tomorrow, or in the community centre in Innerleithen on Tuesday. You can get more of this. But what we're doing symbolically is walking from Scotland into England. We're going to debate what that means. And I think the English question is one of the big issues for what happens after this. I think George is absolutely right about this. I think there's some indications that all is not well within the English polity, and that the debate is behind the debate in Scotland and needs to catch up fast. And that's a big responsibility on all of us from Scotland to be part of that debate. I don't want to turn my back on it, but I do recognise the challenge.
Michael.
Well, asymmetrical devolution is as a unique historical experiment. I mean, it's never been tried in any other country of the world. And I'm not sure it's going to work in the United Kingdom. Because, as you say, it produces so many imbalances. We still have the huge imbalance that one member of this polity is 80% of the whole, and the other three members are no more than 20%. So how do you get any kind of... all systems of effective democratic government are systems of checks and balances. I don't see how it's going to work in the end. So I think right down the line, sooner or later, the whole thing is going to resolve itself into one of two things. A renewed and strengthened and possibly more unified United Kingdom, or independence for the constituent parts. And, you can guess which one of those I think is the more likely.
I think one thing sometimes people like me need to concede is that the unfairness of the union can work both ways. I remember in the House of Commons when Labour MPs in the dying days of Gordon Brown's administration were forcing through issues like foundation hospitals, which only affected England, in which the overwhelming majority of English MPs were against, and they were using Scottish votes to put it through. So I think the unfairness can work both ways, and is yet another reason that independence will be good for the rest of the UK.
Katie.
Well, I think that one of the very good things about this debate, and indeed this referendum, is that it's thrown open things that we would never have considered without the referendum debate. So I think that is an entirely positive thing, because I do think we need to rethink the union for the 21st century. But anybody who thinks that independence would bring less government rather than more government, because the trouble with the independence debate for me has been that it hasn't really been the vision of something completely new. It's been a vision of replication. So that, in essence, that's what's happening already. Many of the UK institutions are being replicated just to deal with Scottish things. So they're not different; they're just replicated. So the people who are going to make money are the bureaucrats and the lawyers and the politicians. So I think whatever happens, I don't think we should vote for independence because we think there's going to be less government. But I do think that a no vote does not mean the status quo, as it's always said, and it really doesn't. So we will have a new union, but a new union where the best bits of the union are preserved and new bits are formed.
And by my reckoning, 24 days from now, the polls will have been open for 8 hours, 55 minutes, and the decision will probably have been made.
Can I just ask one more question?
Aren't
you amazed when people say, oh, it's going to be quite astonishing, about 82 or 83% of the people are going to vote? Where are the rest of where's the 17%? What's happened to them?
Well, they either haven't registered or they're dead and the register is out of date. Once you get above 80%, the electoral register is pretty well a waste of time. Anyway, can I ask you all to thank the two Michaels, Katie and Stephen?